Again, the next session is going to involve two presentations. The first is by Tom Kent. Tom is Director of External Manufacturing, and of course an alumnus of Cranor, which is of course an important component. Tom joined Kimberly-Clark in 1992 as production planner at Kimberly-Clark's Beach Island, South Carolina facility. And then he made his way, he felt it wasn't cold enough, so he made his way back up to Neenah, Wisconsin. Kimberly-Clark has been a sponsor of the center for several years, and one of the things that Tom has done is organized for a set of our undergraduate and master's students to go up to their facility, take a look at their innovation lab, their RFID facility, and other manufacturing facilities. Tom's going to talk to us about procurement trends, which of course, given today's discussion of manufacturing and transition, is going to be a very important component of consideration.
Right.
Thank you, Tom.
Thank you. Yeah, and actually, as Mary can attest, I was a little worried about whether or not this content would be relevant to today's discussion, but after hearing a couple of the prior presenters talk about some of the trends that actually I'm going to talk about today, I'm feeling much better about the relevance. So I think we'll have some good discussion at the conclusion of the presentation. Let me start out, I guess, by introducing Kimberly-Clark a little bit, because my guess is more are familiar with Kimberly-Clark's brands than they are Kimberly-Clark the company. And in fact, I would guess those that do know Kimberly-Clark might actually associate us to being a pulp and paper company, which is consistent with our history. In our 130 years of existence, we have been vertically integrated at various points, but that's certainly changed over the years. And in fact, you might be surprised then to see what we consider to be our current mission, which is to enhance the health, hygiene, and well-being of people every day and everywhere. We are now considered to be a leading global health and hygiene company with a worldwide team of 62,000 employees, manufacturing facilities in 42 countries, selling in 150 with over 18 billion in revenues. Our brands, some of which are depicted there on the left-hand side, enjoy a number 1 or number 2 position in more than 80 countries. I don't know how we estimated this, to be quite honest with you, but we service over 1.3 billion consumers every day with our products under the well-known global brands of Huggies, Kleenex, Scott, Andrex, Kotex, Philips, and Depend. All of those brands enjoy above-average growth with our global retailers. And as I mentioned, we have transitioned out of the pulp and paper type company into a global health and hygiene company, and the spin-off of our Neenah paper division was just one more step in that direction. Again, most are familiar with our consumer brands, but consumer is actually just one of 3 sectors within Kimberly-Clark. In the upper left there, you see Kimberly-Clark Professional. That's a group that sells and manufactures health and hygiene products to the industry and industrial sectors. And then in the lower right, you see the gloves in the Kimberly-Clark Healthcare division, where we manufacture not just gloves, surgical wear, face masks, even medical devices like trach tubes. Okay, on to the topic at hand. I'd like to share just a couple of trends that, although likely identified several years ago, some of these probably 10, 15 years ago, they've really taken hold within Kimberly-Clark in the last couple of years. And the format for each will be the same. I'll share a very similar slide on each topic. We'll talk about opportunities as we see them in Kimberly-Clark, the challenges associated with each of these trends as we see them. And I will throw in just at the bottom where I see procurement's involvement and where we play a role as part of the procurement organization in the fulfillment of some of these trends. I won't spend a lot of time talking about those, I think, in the essence of time. So while admittedly none of these topics are particularly new and earth-shattering, I would hope that as we go through this, we'll spur some conversation and some discussion. So let me start out with business process outsourcing. Quite a bit of conversation over outsourcing over the last probably 10 years or so. We certainly see this as an opportunity in Kimberly-Clark to increase capabilities, particularly in HR and procurement. In fact, the procurement function within Kimberly-Clark is now partially outsourced. And what we outsourced really were those commodities where we felt like a third-party provider could add increased benefit and leverage and increased capabilities. Kimberly-Clark does not have leverage when buying PCs or office supplies. So those are the commodities commodities that we have completely outsourced to a third-party provider. On the other hand, pulp and superabsorbent material, those are commodities that Kimberly-Clark has amongst the world, the largest position of leverage, and so those are retained within internal organizations. Increased speed of service, right level of service. When we outsource, it often causes us to challenge some of the paradigms that we have in our company. For example, in outsourcing IT, we had to ask ourselves, do we really need 99.99% uptime on every one of our systems applications? Probably not. And we were servicing our company that way with our internal operations. So as we took that to outsource providers, we were able to kind of challenge some of that thinking. And obviously cost savings, provider expertise, scale, and labor arbitrage, particularly, again, in IT, HR, and even finance and accounting, do we see those benefits coming to fruition. On the watch out side, poorly defined processes will lead to poorly defined contracts and service level agreements with third-party providers. But what has certainly been a trend to some degree is that companies want to outsource those processes that aren't functioning well internally, and that's a mistake, without a doubt. You have to have a well-defined internal process to take it external and expect solid results. Transition effort is absolutely high and often underestimated. Not just getting there, but keeping it evergreen as well. There needs to be an expectation that internal resources will need to continue to service an outsourced relationship on an ongoing basis. Successful relationship requires time investment. As I mentioned, internal resistance to change is an obvious one. We can do everything better inside. Why on earth would we ask a third party to provide that and the change management effort? Talk about contract manufacturing. You referenced, Ted, that you're exploring contract manufacturing more and more, and in Kimberly-Clark we are too. We do see it as an opportunity to provide flexible capacity. In the case of our tissue businesses, for example, they are highly capital intensive. To add capacity requires tens of millions of dollars, hundreds of millions of dollars in the case of a base tissue machine. And so it's with great reluctance do we add internal capacity to service our growth. So we do look for contract manufacturers to provide that flex surge capacity in seasonality situations and then bring it back in where appropriate. We also see it as a way to quickly get into a market and avoid the capital investment associated to it. Just a quick example of that, within Kimberly-Clark, I was associated to a product line expansion of Huggies branded baby lotions and shampoos and the like, not a product that Kimberly-Clark had previously marketed, but one that we saw as a real opportunity to leverage a current contract manufacturer's capability, bring it to market very quickly, and because of their scale and expertise with that product line, they were able to provide us a cost structure that I don't think we could have duplicated were we to invest in all the capability required to do that product line on our own. On the watch out front, obviously you're expecting company-owned intellectual property as you continue to push contract manufacturing activity. Here again, just like with business process outsourcing, oversight is absolutely necessary. You cannot expect to outsource the manufacturing of your products and not continue to follow up with the requisite due diligence, particularly when you're contract manufacturing overseas. There needs to be a fair amount of ongoing auditing activity to protect yourself and your brands. Internal resistance to change here again, and the change management effort is a common theme. Low-cost sourcing. It should actually say low-cost country sourcing, I guess. Lost a word there. Clearly, as we talked about throughout the course of the day, companies look to low-cost countries to provide significantly lower piece price. We refer to the low-cost countries internally in Kimberly-Clark as the BRICS regions, which is an acronym for Brazil, Russia, India, China, Indonesia, and Turkey are the developing countries that we specifically target. And you know, when pursuing sourcing from low-cost countries, you often find a situation where minimal capital requirements can be provided, because what has to be automated here in the U.S. to provide the right cost structure can often be fulfilled with just added labor in those low-cost countries. So clearly a benefit in terms of speed. And then, you know, in terms of the fast-moving consumer goods segment that we participate in, quick changeovers is an absolute must. And the more automated you are, the more challenged you are in implementing quick changeovers to get that new version of Huggies diapers to market. as quick as possible, for example. So when it's highly labor intensive, that just speeds things along even greater. Watchouts, fairly obvious here, need to consider total value. So many companies are quick to see that piece price difference, and even if they add freight, they assume that that's the total value that they need to compare, low-cost sourcing to domestic sourcing. And in fact, there are so many other factors in terms of customs and duties and the inventory increases that you will no doubt have to deal with in order to service that long supply chain that tend to get lost. And even the cost of quality and the cost of nonconformance, is that factored into the cost analysis of Part A versus Part B? Those are the kinds of things we're analyzing much more closely these days. Social responsibility is an obvious one that has gotten quite a bit of press as of late, and companies need to ensure that they have not just initial due diligence processes that are very robust, but also ongoing auditing processes that ensure abuses are not present. Kimberly-Clark is our brand. I mean, we are all about our brands, and to have our brands on the front page of USA Today associated to a social responsibility issue would be devastating. So this is critical when using low-cost countries. Intellectual property theft, you almost have to assume it's going to happen, quite frankly, and that should steer really which products you take to low-cost regions. If you feel it's highly advantageous and that product provides you competitive advantage, probably not the best one to take to a low-cost country. You can try with legal contracts to avoid any situations there, but good luck in implementing contracts in the first place or enforcing them if it ever came to that. Changing economics, when I first put this together, I would have said that, that devaluation of the dollar, the high cost of freight, all of that was contributing to a very different picture. And in fact, I guess anecdotally, now 3 years ago, Kimberly-Clark transferred one of its products, a toilet seat cover in the KC Professional business, to China for cost savings reasons. 3 months ago, we brought that back for cost savings reasons. Now we'll probably have to go back after the last 3 months, I guess. But that's the volatility of the market, I guess. Communication challenges are obvious. We established a local sourcing office in Shanghai that works with all of our contractors in those areas. Because of the communication challenges, we simply believe that having those on-the-ground resources is critical, and the increased risk associated to that supply chain and to your brand. So you need to be prepared and accepting of these factors. Supplier relationship management and resulting in becoming the customer of choice is something relatively new to Kimberly-Clark's procurement processes, but something we're very much embracing these days. We believe supplier relationship management is absolutely critical in understanding, and no different than customer relationship management is used on the sell side. We believe we need to be very prescriptive about with whom we want to partner. We have over 9,000 suppliers in Kimberly-Clark, and we simply cannot consider each of them strategic partners. It doesn't make sense to. So having defined processes associated to who we want to partner with and who we believe we can leverage to a greater place is of importance to us. And so we have a very structured program now behind supplier relationship management to first segment our suppliers and then to work with those that are considered to be in that top tier group in a very different way. We expect that to drive incremental and step change improvements in cost, quality, and service. We've been working with our top suppliers for years in the small steps of cost improvement, but this is about redesigning supply chains with those top suppliers. This is about joint development efforts. This is about reducing your risk. When you get into a situation like Hurricane Ike, are you going to be the customer of your supplier that gets that limited available stock that's resulting because of the supply chain challenges that a major event can create? On the watch out side, it does require you to be much more open in a relationship than historical, and I got to tell you, within Kimberly-Clark, we are very reluctant to share any IP information with anybody for fear that can come back to haunt us. And so to open those doors and to create a situation where our internal product and technology development folks are willing to share with our supply base where we're going and why is critical for success in this situation. It does require longer-term commitments, more like 5-10 years versus 1-2 years. And we have to get past the fear of lost leverage in that situation. Requires a willingness to share in the gains. These partners are going to ask, first question, well, what's in it for us? And we need to be prepared to answer that effectively. And certainly the benefits are going to be longer term. If we implement a program like SRM and expect to see a change in 3 months, I think we'll be sorely mistaken and disillusioned. Open innovation. Our primary competition in Procter & Gamble has publicly professed to pull 50% of their innovation out of their supply base. At Kimberly-Clark, we too are pushing hard to get an increasing percentage of our innovation out of our supply base for obvious opportunities in terms of speed to market, access to technologies in new and emerging capabilities not currently available, and leveraging the ability to promote this for complementary benefit. It's very difficult, though, we found, to value an embryonic idea and to provide funds to that company, even to a university type operation, to grow that idea and to expect it to provide value down the road. Within Kimberly-Clark, we're very pragmatic, and we look for direct sources of value, and to provide seed funds to some of these ideas has been a bit of an internal challenge for us. And it's certainly best facilitated if both firms have robust open innovation processes in terms of the ultimate ownership of any IP that's generated out of these kinds of activities. Risk management and security of supply. We have gotten very prescriptive about how we manage risk now within the company. We work with our senior leaders in terms of identification for high-risk scenarios and interruption scenarios. We get in front of them with detailed risk mitigation plans that we never used to before, where we sit down and we discuss, given the situation, we are sole source today. We can choose to qualify alternate materials, but it will come at this kind of expense. Do you accept the current risk, or do you wish to pursue the mitigation effort and apply the resources that's required to pursue that mitigation effort? These are things that we feel are critically important to ensure we have the right level of communication with our internal business teams. And we do believe through SRM, as I talked about earlier, that status will help in this area. Resource constraints to implement those mitigation recommendations are always going to be there. And then when you get into major events, what we found is you may have the best of plans associated to your first level in your supply chain, but when you get into the suppliers and the suppliers of that supplier, have you truly thought through all of the implications? And you never do until, and you don't see them until situations like Hurricane Ike arrive, as an example. Sustainability and ethics, again, a bit of a hot topic these days. Sustainability initiatives, we see them, quite frankly, as a great way to drive cost savings. Many of our products are petroleum-based, and anything we can do to reduce the consumption of the materials in the production of our products will only help. Position ourselves as an indispensable partner to our trade customers. Walmart, in particular, is pushing hard for improvements in sustainability, and in fact, they just held a conference in Beijing with a number of their top suppliers to talk about how they're going to label products as one product being more sustainable than another product. So you can actually compare the sustainability factor of a facial tissue to a toothpaste to a diaper to any product, and it'll be interesting to see how that develops. Have to be careful with focusing on the wrong ideas. I'll just touch on that one. Certainly, a couple of, probably a year ago now, renewable fuels, and the focus on renewable fuels was taking hold. And at the same time, it wasn't long after everyone embraced that idea that the perception started to come in that we were causing food shortages in developing countries in particular. So we need to be careful about where we pursue sustainability activity and make sure that we're doing it for the right reasons. Leveraging global spend. Tim talked quite a bit about how he's going to pull together the multiple different sectors within his company and try to analyze and deliver benefits associated to the management of global spend. Kimberly-Clark is no different. We have operations all over the world, as I talked about, and all different systems that consolidate spend information and purchasing information, and our ability to get at that data and to drive an improved leverage position with our supply base is very difficult. There are new tools that are coming together, and Tim talked about how they're doing that. And we too are looking to utilize some tools to pull master data out of all of these tools, understand where we're spending our money, and can we implement global contracts with a couple of our key suppliers to drive standardization. On the watch out side, our organization isn't necessarily ready for this. We have a lot of resistance internally. Our suppliers are great. They really understand us, on a regional level. Why do we need to go use this big global provider? And we need to work through that. And, to some degree, they have, in many cases, they have a fair argument that we need to assess. So it isn't to just dismiss the regional specifics altogether and say, nope, this is corporate, and we're gonna use this provider, end of story. But we need to understand what their needs are. Lean supply chains, we talked about lean as well in the course of the day, and taking lean back to our supply base is certainly a focus of our procurement organization these days. We need to go past the tactical rights, we call them, of right price, right time, right quantity, all the basics of procurement, and we need to get to ever reducing inventories, ever improving lead times and material variability, and we need to be able to coach our suppliers on what it takes to get there. At the same time, we cannot just expect by mandate that if we go in and say, you need to be lean and you need to reduce your lead times, you need to improve your materials variability, walk out the door, that's going to happen. I think anyone that understands lean knows how cultural lean is, and that is not an overnight situation. So it does require cultural change, and we do need to help them understand the value of lean, and it is going to take quite a bit of time in order to step change the supply chain. That's all I have. I guess my intent in sharing this with you, again, as I talked to Mary earlier, was to hopefully show the increasing relevance that I believe procurement has now in supply chain management. I think if I look back 10, 15 years ago, it was so much about price. And that's all procurement was about, was delivering price and conducting the transaction of getting the product to the company. And through these kinds of activities within Kimberly-Clark, we hope to become an ever more important part of our organization in driving cost down. What questions do you have? Yes, sir.
For your procurement people,
Yep.
people that are actually negotiating and dealing with their suppliers, what sort of metrics is Kimberly-Clark using to hold them accountable? I mean, my experience dealing with procurement types over the years is PPV. And like I said, the big thing you're fighting against here. So.
Yeah, it's part of an evolution. We're still stuck with the traditional metrics, I'm afraid, of cost savings, cost avoidance, and working capital improvement are kind of the three big hitters. And as we start to embrace it, we're only a year into our lean journey. So, as we start to embrace lean, we're already talking about what kind of metrics do we want to have about lead time reduction in particular, and what is lead time, how do you measure that, and it's opened a bit of a can of worms, but I'm afraid we're still using the traditional three, and we hope to improve that as we expand lean. Yeah.
How has this current environment affected your procurement? I mean, have suppliers been waiting for you to write them checks, or have you changed procurement in any significant way whereby the working capital of your suppliers and down the line, or consolidated buying for the supply base, as Tim talked about, whether those are new issues or are they things that you already considering?
Honestly, we are monitoring very closely the implications of the current financial crisis to our suppliers. Many of our top suppliers are very large organizations. So they are somewhat immune to the situation because of their just sheer size. At the same time, it was interesting that you put out the questionnaire regarding supply chain financing, because that is a tool that we are using and have started to use quite heavily here in the last couple of months, because it leverages Kimberly-Clark's current position in terms of trade fund borrowing and our cost of capital. Kimberly-Clark has a great cost of capital that some of our suppliers, or certainly our smaller suppliers, do not enjoy. And so through supply chain financing, we can use that cost of capital to get them improved borrowing rates, and that's of interest to them today, without a doubt. So I'm seeing an increase in supply chain financing activity in the last couple of months. Other than that, it's been surprisingly quiet. I'm assuming there's more to come.
Any other questions?
Yeah.
In your quest to go out and find low-cost suppliers,
Yeah.
I mean, a lot of people share they're great,
What went well? Yeah.
what went well?
Yeah.
Any horror stories that you can check out to share with the group that, you know, avoid this or avoid that, or any really bad experiences in trying to
Well, I'll tell you,
implement that objective?
you know, we've had bad experiences domestically as much as we've had bad experience with low-cost sourcing. I think the reason is because of our pressure to protect our brands, we've done a very thorough job of due diligence when we go to low-cost countries for sourcing. And for that reason, I think we've avoided a lot of the horror stories that might exist. And again, honestly, we've actually run into quite a few more horror stories domestically in the last 2 years that I can think of off the top of my head, where we didn't understand the supplier's financials, for example, and that supplier couldn't get any credit, and none of our suppliers of raw materials would provide to them. We later found out, as we're now a month away from launch, and you know, we completely miss a launch because of our inadequate due diligence activity with domestic providers. So it isn't so much the low-cost country because of our resource allocation to that kind of work.
How do you manage exchange rate, different currencies, and the fluctuation?
Yeah, it's kind of interesting when Tim mentioned that he uses local currency. We actually don't. We stick to the U.S. dollar as being the price we negotiate. It makes for challenging negotiations as the fluctuations occur with our suppliers, but I think we'd rather have those discussions than deal with. So it's just a different philosophy, but we use the U.S. dollar primarily.
Can you share what your experiences are with, I would guess, primarily some of your larger suppliers that would be able to absorb more risk than some of your lower suppliers, and how you've established agreements that would be assume some level of risk on both sides?
You know, I think it would be a larger issue if our larger suppliers weren't domestically based. Many of them are, or European based, in which case we're trading in euros. So we don't quite frankly, we don't have a tremendous presence of suppliers in regions that have that really extreme variation in exchange rate to the dollar. So we haven't seen that quite yet.
Given the length of your supply chain,
Yeah.
how do you factor in the cost of increases in opportunities as far as lost opportunities?
Yeah, well, honestly, we buffer the long supply chains with inventory, which you know, Kimberly-Clark always believes in a very high level of service to our customers. So we'll take the pain of working capital over a potential service loss. We tend to run 99.2% customer service rates as our objective fill rate, which is probably a little on the high side, quite frankly, and something we're reevaluating. So what we do is we just build inventory to deal with that. Now, again, what we need to do a better job of evaluating is total value, and when inventory is very high associated to a long supply chain, what is that to the piece price? And are we effectively calculating that equation? Now, what that tends to boil down to is what is your cost of carrying? And at Kimberly-Clark, like probably most multinationals, you tend to put cost of carrying inventory in the 15-20% territory. And I think if you listen to a lot of ascribers of lean, they'll tell you it's much larger than that. It could be 50, 60, 70%. And boy, if you use that in your calculations, you get a very different scenario, and you may not even pursue that long supply chain. You may pursue a much more domestic close supply chain. So we're I guess the short answer is we're exploring ways to improve our valuation of the length of the supply chain in that initial assessment of supplier A versus supplier B.
Okay. Any other questions for Tom? Thank you, Tom.
Yep.
Before we begin the discussion with Roger, we have Jerry Lynch, who's director of our Executive Masters Program. And Jerry has a little bit of time to slip in and talk to you a little bit about our executive programs before we move on to the discussion with Roger. We also have Mark Bagnoli, who's from our accounting group here, so that we can have a lively discussion after Jerry's presentation, which is also going to be lively.
Sure, absolutely. Well, as Anant said, I'm here to give you a little information about Exec Ed. This is really kind of a sales pitch, 4 years to get a PhD.